fantastični ste. Sorry, yes. Pošto se ja zapravo služim engleskim profesionalno, ja ću se prebaciti na engleski sada. Ali bilo kakvo pitanje možete mi postaviti naravno na našem jeziku. Znači, double act. Santa in Croatian and me in English. Okay. So this is a picture from Rebro, from Sanda's clinic last 2 years ago, with 2 girls with Williams syndrome diagnosed quite early. I think one of the girls was there earlier on. So we'll have a look at the facial features, and we'll see some specific cognitive profile that's very unique to this particular condition, and some behavioral challenges as well. So they do have on the basis of this, we can actually see how people who are not clinicians, teachers and educators can recognize this condition. So this is a girl from Novi Sad. She was 17 when I met her. She didn't know that she had Williams syndrome. So this is in 2017, 2018. I recognized 3 young adults with Williams syndrome who didn't know they had it. And me, a linguist, okay? So I'm a clinical linguist. I have some background in psychology, but I worked with these people in the States some 20 years earlier. And I was really baffled or shocked rather, that these people didn't know they had a diagnosis. I met them at the Center for Learning Disabilities, so they were in the system all these years. And in fact, the first 2, you'll see the picture later on, one of them was, I met the 2 of them in the center, and then when I spoke to the psychologist, the educational psychologist, the director of the center, they said, oh wow, there's a 3rd girl who really looks like them. We thought they were cousins, and she's in a secondary school. So that's how I met this other person somewhere else. So raising awareness is really crucial amongst different disciplines. So as a linguist, I'm really honored to be with Sanda today here. So this is just some of the facial characteristics Sanda mentioned already. But what's really interesting about the profile in this population, like in many of the populations that we work with, there is never an even pattern of strengths and weaknesses. We actually see like peaks and valleys in different domains. So for instance, these people, both children and adults, especially children actually, are usually overactive and have very limited concentration span. They can't sit still. But at the same time, they can be really preoccupied with certain topics, with certain objects, with certain people. They can be excessively anxious, but at the same time, they're really hyper-sociable. They're really over-friendly, especially to adults. And which can be a danger, obviously, to the parents. But you can't. It's a very specific profile. So this kind of over hypersociability. At the same time, they're fearful of different noises. Hyperacusis is well known in this condition. They're fearful of heights and uneven surfaces, and this is due to their specific difficulties in visual spatial domain, as we will see in a minute. And at the same time, about between 30, well, depending on different literature you read, between 20 and 40% of people, children and adults with Williams syndrome, also meet the threshold of the autism diagnosis. So what do we know about cognitive profile of this very rare disorder? We see mild to moderate intellectual disability. We see difficulties with visual spatial cognition, abstract reasoning, and number knowledge. At the same time, we see very good face recognition and pretty good auditory short-term memory skills. And what about language? So this is where I come from, okay? So, although many GPs, general practitioners, didn't know of Williams syndrome, linguists have known of Williams syndrome, since the early 2000s, I think, because of this very interesting pattern of relatively weak cognition, but relatively strong language. So language production is stronger than language comprehension. Vocabulary is usually much stronger. They use some words that you wouldn't hear from a child, let alone a child with disability. And also, they may have some stereotyped language. They may, and because of their hypersociability, they are attracted to adults, and they enjoy adult company. However, their language strengths can be deceptive. Okay, so their production is good, their comprehension is worse. And this may lead to an overestimation of their abilities. So often people, I was told by parents whose teachers said, oh, everything's fine, they're completely communicative, they're very happy, they're totally fine. But actually, they're not understanding. So when we do linguistic studies, when we look at some complex structures, they actually don't comprehend them, even though they may seem like they're using them. Here's some examples, actually, from teenagers in the very first study by Ursula Bellucci at the Salk Institute. I'll let you read them or hear them. And I really like number 4. I would fly, and if I liked a boy, I would land on his head and start chirping. It's a really flowery language, really complex language, really rich language, right? And then just for comparison here, this is the answers to the same question. Sorry, I didn't read the question. What if you were a bird? Teenagers with Down syndrome with the same overall IQ produce very short utterances, often ungrammatical as well. So very, very different. Although, as a doctor, you would say they have intellectual disability, you would expect the same type of answers or the same type of abilities, but that is not the case. At the same time, here's some examples of difficulties in the visual spatial domain. So at the top we see the free drawing of a house, and this is an example that a teenager with Williams syndrome is trying to copy. We see disjointed drawing. Okay, so there's some attention to detail, but a very disjointed drawing compared to a teenager with Down syndrome with the same overall IQ, who's produced a drawing of a house that is poor in internal detail, but we see the organization is there, right? So just to emphasize this pattern of peaks and valleys, okay? We don't expect a compromised profile in all different domains. We see strengths and weaknesses in different domains that we have to be aware of and we can actually work on if you're thinking about intervention and therapy. So when it comes to cognition, we have good verbal memory. They have affinity for music. So if you're thinking about therapy, maybe you can do some tasks that involve their strong abilities, such as a love of music and good verbal memory. And at the same time, they have poor visual spatial memory. When it comes to language, we have to be aware that there's good production and poor comprehension. What I didn't mention is the use of language in social situations may also be quite compromised. So they are not able maybe to take into account the interests and the topics that are being maintained by their conversational partner. So they can be very perseverative. They persevere on a certain topic. And that can also be a problem with establishing peer relations. So they're great with adults, and adults really like them, but they have difficulties establishing friendships and social relations amongst their peers, with their peers. So despite this very high social drive, they have deficits in social cognition. They're not really understanding what another person is thinking or what their intentions are and how to interpret the conversational interaction. And at the same time, they have a love of music, but very sensitive. They may be very sensitive to noise early on in life. So just to be aware that we can, there's these particular areas, I think, though. If you see a child with these facial characteristics, if you see that they're really fond of music, they're chatterboxes, they incessantly chatter, you have to stop them, and they get attracted to strangers, which is a problem, that's often a Williams syndrome. And Sandra gave us an example where she recognized a child in the clinic, in the corridor. And the clinic, they didn't know that Sandra just went in and said, I think this is Williams syndrome, just on the basis of the interaction with this boy who was a teenager, right? So I'll stop here, and actually before I do, this is a picture from, these are two families, Marko and Jelena, who came from Serbia, from Novi Sad and from Belgrade. They came to UCL, to my university, and I took them to a World Congress on Williams syndrome in Skegness, with the help of the Foundation or Association for Williams syndrome that we established in 2017, 2018 with Milka Budakov, who's also here. She was on our board, Dr. Milka Budakov. Where is she? She should be here. And so we do have this association. We don't have enough money. We're not very great at fundraising. So if you have any advice, please let us know. Thank you.